Our presentation this morning is rolling with the punches and punching back. The Millennial Librarians approach to librarian budgets and acquisitions. This is a 45-minute session, and the first 35 minutes will be with our panelists here, and the last 10 minutes will be questions. So start thinking about some questions you want to ask after the presentation. Our speakers this morning are Ashley Chase, Associate Director at Stetson University College of Law, Lindsay, Cronk, who is the Coordinator of Online Resources and Collections at the University of Houston. Ellen Frentzen is the Assistant Librarian for Administration at Boston University School of Law. And finally, we have Christine Weaver-Pieh, who is the Collection Resources Manager at Medina County District Library. Please help me welcome our panelists.
Good morning. This is an overwhelmingly large crowd. And if people wanted to stop coming in, that would be okay with all of us, I think. I'm Ashley Chase, and we are pleased to talk to you today about Millennials' approach to library budgets and acquisitions. And let me pull this up really fast as we get started. So there were a couple of reasons why we got together to do this presentation, and one of them is because we have, each of us individually, had some experiences in which we have had negative feedback or negative interactions with colleagues or vendors or something due to our age. And because of that, personally, I started editing a book with Hein entitled Millennial Leadership in Libraries, and it should be published next year. And a couple of these ladies are contributors to that book. And so as a part of that, we wanted to sort of continue this discussion about what libraries are going to look like under the leadership of millennials as we move forward. So just a quick intro. What's a millennial? Person born in the 80s or 90s, usually plural. So the studies say different things. So according to some people, millennials were born for anywhere from 1976 through 2000, 2002. It just depends on what you use. But this is the most commonly accepted definition of what a millennial is. And we are all firmly within this, despite our cuspiness, as Lindsay just referred to it. So, you know, we're born in the early 80s, but certainly fall squarely within the most strict definition of being a millennial. And so we'll start with the negatives about us before we get going. So we're narcissistic, right? And I was telling these ladies before, one of the very first things my dad taught me when I was a kid is to tell people, I'm great, just ask me. And so that's his fault, right? But it's also, I have a very strong sense of self, and I think all of these ladies feel the same way. Lindsay, what did you say your first phrase was?
I the whole world.
So we've grown up with this very healthy sense of self that has also made us a little bit needy. But that's our parents' fault, right? Nothing is our fault. It's our parents' fault that we're needy. We're also cynical. This cynicism isn't what you think of in terms of like a Gen X cynicism. It's a cynicism towards other millennials because we believe that our generational cohort are also self-important and narcissistic, and so we tend to not trust them. And so that has made us cynical. The last three sort of go hand in hand. We are impatient, we are broke, and we are stressed out. So millennials are the most educated generation in history, and along with that has come a debilitating student loan debt for many of us. I am not ashamed to say that I have over $250,000 in student loan debt that I am trying to pay off. And so that has made me extremely impatient in my career, which is why I have been a librarian for less than 5 years and became the associate director of my library a year and a half ago because I am broke, like really broke. And then we're also stressed out to boot. So it's like just these things compound on top of each other. And so when you're working with millennials, if they seem like they want to rise up the chain in your library really, really fast, it's probably because they don't have any damn money and they're trying to do the best they can for themselves. Okay, now the positives. You can see that they're like double the number of positives that there were negatives, and that's because we're narcissistic. So the first is obviously we think of millennials as being tech savvy. This is not the tech savvy that you think, though, right? Like, we are users of this stuff, but we don't know a damn thing about what happens behind the scenes. And a lot of us don't want to know. Like, you're lucky if you have a millennial in your library who's interested in not only using your ILS, but how your ILS works, right? So if you find that, you've found a millennial unicorn. Most of us are just like, ooh, Facebook, ooh, Twitter. So that can go both ways. We're civic-minded, so millennials are very geared towards doing things for their communities. We really want to be in touch with our users in libraries and how they're feeling and how they're using the space, and we want to make their lives better. Okay? We're compassionate, same kind of a deal. Confident. See how I flipped narcissistic? We're confident because I'm narcissistic. We are team-oriented, and this drives particularly Gen Xers crazy, according to the literature. We really want to work in teams all the time. Because of my cuspiness, I am not like that at all. I don't like working in teams, but it depends on who you talk to. But by and large, millennials, particularly as they get a little younger, are really team-oriented. Well-educated, like we talked about before. Entrepreneurial, so we like to try new things, and we don't care if we fail a lot of times. We are pragmatic idealists, so we have these grand visions of what we can do, but we do actually think about concrete steps to get there most of the time. We are results-oriented. Okay, and again, that can go both ways. And we're multitaskers. That could also be a negative because how many of us have 17 tabs open in our browsers and we're doing something in our ILS and we're answering a reference question and we're not doing any of it well. So, but we're multitaskers. So the way we're going to sort of roll into this presentation is we've grouped some questions that we're going to ask one another to talk about into a couple of categories, and we're going to start with relationships. And the first question I want to ask my fellow panelists is to provide me an example of when you felt you were treated differently because of your age, or give me a scenario. So I know Lindsay and Ellen both have good ones, and then I have one too.
I'll get us kicked off. In a phone interview, one of the interviewers called me precocious. And it wouldn't have been so terrible, except it was clear that she thought it was a coded word that I wouldn't understand. I'm 33 years old. This is my second career, and I've been managing since I was 27. These sort of small language choices, which some would call microaggressions in a way, I find them very challenging because I'm an extremely positive person. So pivoting to answer and address that while keeping a cheerful attitude and knowing that I'm being judged for an aspect of my experience that I can't control, that I was born in 1983.
Okay, so I actually have two favorite examples. The first was I was actually at a Leadership Development Institute with Ashley, and we were working in a small group, and the rest of my group members started passing out their business cards, and a number of members in my small group declined to give me their cards for future connections because I'm so young I couldn't possibly do anything for them or their careers. And then this newest one just happened at the last conference I was at, where a woman said, "You're an associate director? Well, you can't possibly be an associate director. You're much too young. Every associate director I know is at least 60. And I thought, well, okay. And I think it's a little challenging to sort of take that gracefully, in that I have worked very hard to get where I am. I know I'm extraordinarily lucky to be an associate director at my age, and it wouldn't happen in all libraries. But just because I am not yet 60 doesn't mean that I don't work very hard or have, good ideas on how to do things, or can, help you or provide advice.
I'm not afraid to call out the Development Institute that Ellen and I were at when that happened. That was at Harvard. And it happened sort of across the board. Ellen got it a little bit more in her face than I did at Harvard, but people were certainly not open to what those of us who were under 35 had to say in any of the sessions, really, unless we were specifically called upon by the teachers at the Harvard Institute. So it was disheartening, to say the least. Luckily, we still got a lot out of it, and I think it helped both Ellen and I further our careers, but it was a little it was unfortunate that that happened. My personal experience actually has to do with a vendor who's here, and when I walked by the table last night, I got all clenched and stabby. And I won't call out the vendor, but we were having trouble authenticating through our proxy server, and I called them, and they said, I want to talk to somebody with more experience. And I said, well, you have me. You can only talk to me. And he said, well, I want to talk to the tech guy. So then that created a whole, like, now we're dealing with not only you think I'm not experienced enough, but apparently I'm the wrong gender to deal with our tech problems. And so it compounded in me screaming at him, we're canceling your damn product. We're canceling it right now. And we did and have never looked back. So this is why I love the Charleston conference, because you can say crap like that and people applaud. If this were the American Association of Law Libraries, everybody would have left and they would be like, ooh, not a lawyer. Okay, next, how would you describe your vendor relationships? And I'll start because this sort of segues and then we'll go from there. I'm extremely blunt with our vendors and sometimes offensively so, but we have developed a system in our library, particularly for subscribing to journal packages and other things, where we have checklists. We have acquisitions checklists, we have implementation checklists, and we have cancellation checklists. And they don't want to answer my questions if I'm reading them off the checklist, and so I send them the checklist and say, if you can't answer all of these to my satisfaction, we're not going to subscribe to your product. And it has saved me a tremendous amount of time. But it has also made them realize that I'm serious, and I do know what I'm talking about because it's in writing. And they're not trying to sort of nitpick me apart on the phone or sell me something that, that they think that I need when it's not actually what I need. So, ladies?
Like Ashley, I think that clear lines of communication and being incredibly frank are super useful in vendor relationships, period. But coming from sort of near vendor side, having worked at Lyrasis and consortia for years, I think that the best way to do that is to have relationships with the individuals who are working at your vendor. That way I can present criticism too of product issues in a way that is more frank and will be understood and hopefully taken from a less defensive posture, right? I see vendors as one more relationship that we need to build and strengthen so that we're in better positions to serve our users, spend our budget wisely, et cetera.
I don't know, my relationship with my vendors are very two-directional. I think with my former manager, whatever the vendor said, she would just say, okay, that's the way it's gonna be. And I would say, well, what about this or what about that? And I think that we've actually helped vendors come up with new features to products or a different way to look at things. And so I think that, you're the customer, but you're paying them money and you have to really expect something out of them. And I think that they appreciate, like, they don't know what we need unless we tell them what we want or need, and then they can add that to the product. And we've gotten very close with some vendors with, doing first runs of new software and things like that. So it actually benefits a lot of people if you can feel like you can talk with them about things.
Okay, we're going to do one more in relationships because I want to make sure we get some stuff. What qualities do you most value in your coworkers?
I'll start. I'm a big fan of taking responsibility for your own actions. So if a mistake happens, just say, hey, this didn't go as well as I'd hoped. Here's what I think we should do next time. I think particularly respecting skills and abilities that are different from yours. No one person is good at all of the things. And one thing I really try to stress in my team is to respect that, coworker A may do something very, very differently than you do, and that's okay, because that person is very good at that thing, and you, frankly, are not as good at that thing, which is the third quality I value, which is knowing where your weaknesses are. So when do you need to ask for help? And when should you look at something and say, this is really not my bailiwick. You can handle this one, which is why I did not have an answer to the question on vendor relationships. I have a technical services librarian. She's much better at it than I am. So I let her handle the vendors, and I handle all of the budgeting and the statistics.
Okay. Go ahead. Chris,
I was just gonna say, I think the thing I value most in coworkers is to have them get beyond, but we've always done it this way. about twice a year, we'll walk through the entire process of my department and we'll see if there were little changes to how we order things or how things come in or how they're processed. And like, well, if we do this instead or that instead. And I've tried to help my staff understand, like, it's not like you're doing something wrong. We're just going to do it differently now, and it's going to be faster, better. We're going to get things out to people, and they don't feel like work is being taken away or they're being criticized that they didn't catch it. It's like, if we all walk through the whole process together, we can pick out things that I can do that instead or that kind of a thing. So that's what I really appreciate when I'm working with people.
Did it about what they said, but I would also add that I ascribe to the sort of idea of failing faster. Let's innovate, let's prototype, let's do something new. But in order to create an environment where that's okay, you have to build a lot of trust, right? So I would say that the thing I value most in my coworkers, and it's really just an essential piece, is kindness and a willingness to approach the work as a team.
So I'm going to flip this a little bit and instead talk about what I would hope that my colleagues value in me in my library as a millennial. So I am one of two millennials in my library. The other is our systems administrator. And people assume that because of our age that we can do things that are not necessarily what we're good at, like Ellen was just talking about. So I think if you have millennials working in your library, it's important to not go to them assuming they're going to know how to do stuff, because due to their age, due to their inexperience, they may feel like they just have to try it even when they're not comfortable, and then it ends up getting even more messed up, and then they may be hesitant to talk to you about why it got messed up. So I think making sure that you can have an open, transparent conversation with your colleagues, regardless of age, about where they're comfortable, to make sure that people are working within their skill set and not, I mean, I think it's great to learn new things, don't get me wrong, but if you have a project that you need done in 20 minutes, and it's something, using SQL to query your ILS, don't just assume that your millennial can do it. Like, your technical services librarian who's been there for 30 years might be the best person to do that. So don't make assumptions about your colleagues based on whatever their age or their perceived abilities are. So our next category is decision making. In what ways do you think your library collections are going to change under the leadership of millennials?
I will start. I take a lot of inspiration from what Chris Berg is doing at MIT, right? And the initiatives that we're seeing coming from Thomas Medina and Stuart Varner. I can't help but think we're at a sort of reckoning point where what we consider collections is going to need to be fundamentally reimagined, particularly in terms of the inside-out model, but we're still gonna have to keep delivering all of the collections that we're making use of right now. The models aren't going to go away, we're just going to have to do more. I'm really excited about the role that I think I can play in that, particularly as a data person who happens to be in collections. It's a really, really, really exciting time.
I think in my library, we're personally headed towards leaner collections generally. And largely this is due to practical constraints. So I just found out from our head of access services, we have 123 linear feet of shelving remaining in our overflow storage area. So we actually have to start weeding and buying a little less. Obviously budgetary constraints, but basically we're looking more at not buying everything we've always bought, and sort of holding off. And if anybody really wants it, we will buy it then. And I think a really good recent example of this is we've always purchased a library copy of a particular 9-volume set. And one of our faculty members likes to have an office copy. But he only wants 2 volumes of the office copy, and he wants us to hold on to the other 7. So we cut his copy, and we check him out the 2 volumes he wants and tell him that it's his. And now we're down to 1 copy, so we're really only holding on to 7 volumes. Things like that.
So I think, because Ellen and I both work in law libraries, the way we've always done collections is sort of interesting, because historically law libraries had more money than they knew what to do with in academia, because we had so many students and they were paying exorbitant tuition. And that's not the case anymore. Our student body is roughly half of what it was when I started at Stetson 5 years ago. Applications to law school are down. People don't want to be lawyers anymore because they're not making any money, and then they decide to be librarians, and then they really don't have any money. But, so all of our collection decisions now are based on hard data instead of on thinking that maybe this will get used for a seminar class at some point. So we have largely stopped buying monographs, which is a problem because we have endowed funds that can only be used for monographs. So we're trying to rework with the estates to see if we can get that fixed. I run cost per use for all of our journals individually, even if as part of a package, because that way, if we need to go down to just subscribing to 2 journals from Taylor and Francis instead of paying for an entire package where only those 2 journals get used, even if it's a little bit more expensive to do it that way, it doesn't make any sense to have a whole bunch of stuff that nobody's ever going to look at. And by cutting the stuff that nobody looks at, we may be able to drive usage up for the stuff that people are actually using. So I'm much more interested in doing it that way. And we only purchase materials for faculty if they request it. And we've slashed and burned journals in favor of purchasing individual articles, which I know a lot of people are doing, so it's not like that's anything new. Let's see. This is a good one. Do you foresee any harm in your library budget and/or collections given the difference in the way you handle it versus your predecessors, who may be of a different generation?
I don't think so. I hope not. I try to be very Hippocratic about it, do no harm. I think that my previous manager would hold back a lot of money and say, oh, just in case some new format or some new resource, and we wouldn't buy to demand. We're levy funded, so people pay us to buy them things that they want. And so I think that when I took over, it was a lot of, give the people what they want because they paid for it. And I don't think we're harming it. I think that people are seeing more and more value. We've also started circulating like hotspots. We haven't done like cake pans yet, but we're trying different things. Like people know we're about books, but they, public libraries are more community spaces now and people want more than just that. So we're just looking at different things. We do have some vocal members saying, where are all the books? And it's like, there are less, but there's a lot. And we'll ask like, what are you coming in and looking for that you're not finding? Oh, I find everything I need. You just should have more books. I'm like, whoa, I don't, okay. If you're getting what you want, I don't know if that's the right way to do it. So a lot of it, I think there's a lot more. I have spoken to a lot more, we call them members, not patrons, members, one-on-one, who don't understand the changes. We're doing some repurposing and that kind of thing, but everyone's getting what they want. It's just we're giving more people more of what they want, so it's actually working out well.
I work at an ARL, so there's only so much that I can change, right? There are standards, there are certain ways that we're expected to spend that I couldn't transform if I wanted, just because that's the way the system is. So I would say I couldn't harm it if I tried.
I think in part it depends on your definition of harm and what you're expecting a collection at a major urban law school to look like. So I'm slowly trying to pry my colleagues away from the idea that if Harvard Law has it, we have to buy it. There is, under the ABA, obviously, a limit to how much I can do, but we're buying not every major treatise. We tend to buy now one in a particular area, and looking at more practical resources, so practitioner materials, study aids, things that our students and our alumni will actually use in their day-to-day, either for studying or for their actual work, rather than something that a faculty member might need in preparing a law review article that will be checked out once that we could just get through ILL.
Okay. Are there things that you feel you need to know as a millennial librarian before you would be truly comfortable managing your library budget or collection? What's missing in your skill set? And I'll start because I'm standing here. So I think that for me, I need to know more about Banner. So we use Banner to do all of our accounts payable stuff, and it's horrible, and I don't really understand it at all. And luckily, I have a systems administrator who does, and he's able to pull things for me from Banner, which is great. It's nice being able to say, this is what I need, and he can get it in like 2 seconds, which blows my mind. But I also think working at a law school, There's a lot of faculty politics that I am not privy to because I don't have a seat at the table. And I'm never going to learn that until I'm in a position where I'm on the faculty. And that only happens in law libraries when you're a director most of the time. And so I can't have the same conversations with the people who are having a huge impact on our collections as my director can. And that's something I'm going to have to learn on the ground when somebody's willing to give me a shot as a director.
I question the value of the idea of getting comfortable. I hope that I'm always driven to want to learn more and do better in the job. Our budgets, our collections are really sacred things, right? And I think we owe them the respect of being a little uncomfortable and not getting set in our ways.
Okay, do we want to move on to the next one? Okay. Projects and priorities. Now I have to find my appropriate questions. What are your budget priorities and how does this differ from your predecessors in terms of staff, patrons, or materials?
My budget priority is getting everything down to 0 at the end of the year. I think she would kind of be like, well, it'll just go into the general fund and next year there's something. No. Everything has to be 0. We don't waste money, but we'll do special projects to backfill different authors or collections or that kind of a thing, or high use items. So that's just the priority. And then tracking usage, and at the end of the year doing a little tweaking of the budget, but just spend it all.
Ellen, do you want to talk about your charts? So these are Ellen's spending priorities.
Okay, so I am a huge fan of the budget visual because I really think it helps my staff to understand what's going on. So priority-wise, my biggest priority is spending on my staff, from professional development to really what they need to serve our patrons. This actually very strongly differs from my predecessor, who allowed everyone one conference per year, and we brought in our own office supplies, and she held on to the budget very, very tightly. And we always did a mass monograph purchase in April. And then several of us would make cookies and bring them in for our poor technical services staff who had spent 2 weeks doing nothing but buying ebooks. In addition, we have affirmatively shifted our focus. So previously, the focus was on faculty. What the faculty asked for, the faculty got. And what the students asked for, well, they didn't know what they wanted, so we would tell them and provide them with what they wanted. So we are now, I have set aside extra money for student appreciation and student things like a cocktail reception with our new director. So what those 3 charts are illustrating are, the first one all the way over is my predecessor's spending priorities. My predecessor actually left halfway through the last fiscal year, so that's, the middle graph is half my predecessor and half me, and you can see I'm already starting to increase the amount that we're spending on student and some staff appreciation. We're increasing the amount spent on staff development. And then for the current fiscal year, these are my estimates. I've set aside money in various categories to make sure that my staff are going to conferences and taking continuing education classes, and that we are doing a major student event involving everyone in the law school each semester, not just handing out candy on Halloween. And in part, I am doing this by looking at resources that are no longer used. So I had IT go through all of our public access computers and see which ones had only been logged into once a week or less. And I took out half of them and I did not replace them, and I used the funds available to replace them to buy more things for our students.
Yay. So, let me get to my next one, I apologize. How do you identify and prioritize your primary, secondary, and tertiary audiences, and how does this differ from your predecessors? So I was at Internet Librarian 2 weeks ago, and I did a pre-conference on outcomes and assessment, and Mo from the Toronto Public Library talked about identifying your stakeholders. And he said your stakeholders are the people who can either stake you up or stake you through the heart. And that really really resonated with me. I think in law libraries, we tend to focus so much on faculty and students, faculty and students, faculty and students. But for us, our stakeholders are really the American Bar Association, because they have lots and lots and lots of rules about libraries and law libraries and what we have to have. They're our dean, who can whip the rug out from under us whenever he wants in terms of the budget, because he controls the budget by and large. And then to a lesser degree, it's faculty, staff, but it's also our alumni who can donate to the library and make a big difference. And so for me, thinking about our budget and our collections in that way is going to be huge going forward. Like what will destroy us and what will make us. And I don't think my predecessor has necessarily always thought about it in that way. We're having ongoing conversations now about that new approach that hopefully we'll be able to work through. Oops.
So I love the stats and the numbers, as you may have already gleaned, but I don't want to track my students to death, right? I want to respect their privacy enough to let them live. So I kind of like to apply the user experience model of creating personas for different users, thinking through who they are and how they're touching the library. Because, for instance, the undergraduates who are climbing all over my physical space, I am unconvinced that they are the ones making such liberal use of our e-resources. Thinking through those concepts, the ideas can be very helpful. And obviously, I also look at where FTE is rising, where people are moving in terms of selecting their majors, and I let that inform my collection development approach.
So leadership. Let's do, what creative ways have you found to compensate for shortfalls or flat or shrinking budgets to still achieve your goals and plans?
Mine's pretty easy. We've made more materials no holds, so they can't, we're part of a consortium, and rather than all the cool stuff going out for the whole year, we start to make no holds copies. So we still share some, but a lot of ours are just, and the circ is like 300% higher if it stays in rather than going out into delivery all over Northeast Ohio. So we share, but less.
I've implemented a database review system wherein our selectors rank our e-resources, journal packages, basically anything we buy on a scale of 1 to 5 on criteria involving usability, interest, rising use or desiredness in terms of subject. That way we make less hasty, fear-motivated cuts and more methodical cuts. It seems to be going well.
What level of transparency do you attempt to achieve with your staff regarding the budget, and how does that differ from your predecessor? So I'll start with this one. I believe in being as transparent as I possibly can, but not being transparent before it's appropriate. So I've been in meetings where one thing has been said, and then the dean meets with faculty, and then the next week something is drastically different. And in the interim, my predecessor would have talked to the librarians about what's going on and gotten them all riled up, and then things change on a dime, and then we have to go back and get them unriled or re-riled for a different reason, depending on what's going on. And so for me, playing it a little close to the vest until I'm absolutely sure that what is happening is the final thing that's happening has been really important for my leadership and for my management style. I don't think that everybody needs to know everything about the library budget. I'm lucky in that our salaries are not a part of the library budget. They're part of the institutional budget. So that part I don't have to keep a secret, which I know, Ellen, you do, right? And so that makes it a little bit easier because we can talk about our budget on a bigger scale. But our budget has been cut 60% since I got to Stetson, and that's less than 5 years. So it's hard not to talk about it because you can actually see what's happening, but there's no point in getting people worked up before that needs to happen. They'll get worked up enough on their own. Oh, yeah.
Okay, so hopefully my staff knows that I will do my best to get them whatever they ask for, especially if they can ask me at the beginning of the year so I can plan for it. The other way in which I am more transparent than my predecessor is, I think, when we do selection. So previously we would meet as a committee, we would decide whether or not we wanted to buy or cancel something, send the recommendation to my predecessor, and then never hear back. So if it didn't show up in the catalog, we assumed that my predecessor had said no. If it did show up, then our cancellation recommendation clearly had not been accepted. So this is a chart that I update every month just to show the selections committee what we've spent thus far in our total budget, what's encumbered, which is the really skinny orange line in the middle, and then our estimated renewal costs. So the amount we have remaining at the moment is below the 0 line. So when we get to a renewal decision and 1 or 2 people on the committee go, but we've always bought those 7 manuals on legal writing, we can't possibly choose between them, then I remind them, our remaining money is below 0. What else would you like to cancel? Do you have these 7 items? Or would you like to buy one now and maybe hold the remaining 6 in reserve if we have more money at the end of the year? Just to really focus them in on what we can actually do and sort of what the choices are that they're going to have to make to get the things that they really want.
And I believe that we are now ready for questions, right? That was my signal. So grab your torches and pitchforks and come at us, because we're ready for all the... When I did a presentation at the Internet Librarian, and some guy in the back stood up and just started saying that millennials are the worst and I'm the worst, and I just kind of stood there and took it, so I'm ready. Hit us with your best shot. I've got self-confidence. I'm not worried about it.
Hi. Lucy Fields, University of Indianapolis, Gen X. I appreciate what you said about taking responsibility. And that's, I don't know if that's a generational thing, but how do you approach someone who is not taking responsibility?
So it's funny. This is...
Also, your hair is gorgeous.
Oh, well, thank you. That's very nice. You're not doing anything for that narcissistic thing that I've got going on. So I actually have problems with people in my library sort of not taking responsibility across the board. So to some degree, I think it's generational. To some degree, I think it's station in life, where some of my people who are closer towards the end of their careers have stopped taking responsibility because they're just sort of like, meh. The millennials in your libraries are probably not taking responsibility because they might be scared to. Right? Because of what I talked about in terms of being given tasks that they weren't ready to do and not wanting to acknowledge that. So I think for me, when I approach it with my colleagues as what can I teach you so that you know what happened here? You know, because they might not even realize in not taking responsibility that they did anything that, you know, like they don't connect it with the fact that they did something wrong that affected what happened. And so I think taking it as what can we teach you to make sure this doesn't happen again, it gets them thinking about maybe the changes they could have made, and hopefully gets them to realize, oh shit, that was me that did that. Like, I'm the one that messed that up, and then, you know, things can change.
It is definitely difficult, especially depending on sometimes the personalities that you're dealing with. The 2 things, I guess the 3 things that I have tried to do that are usually mostly successful, making sure that everybody knows nobody died. Like, yeah, it happened, but we can fix it, and we can hopefully prevent it from happening the next time. And also framing it very neutrally. Like, one particular phrase that works really well is to say, this happened, and it made me feel very stuck because of X consequence. How can we prevent this from happening again? And then also framing it as part of a larger example. So it's not focusing in on the individual mistake. I work with a couple of people who will always go, well, I'm really sorry you think I did a bad job with that. And I'm trying to say, no, it's not that I think you did a bad job with that. It's an example of a larger pattern that we're seeing that we want to correct. So can you tell me how this happened, how we got here, and how we can be moving forward?
Really quickly, I work in data, so I screw up all the time too. Like, things just go wrong, applications fail. You know, we're all troubleshooting access issues all the time. So I would say one thing that really works for me a lot is acknowledging upfront when I goofed, creating a culture, right, where it's okay for that to happen, but then we claim responsibility afterwards for cleanup.
And I have a if you have to cry, go outside management style, which is, and I don't mean that physically, like I don't mean the physically if you have to cry, go outside, but like you dwelling on what we did wrong is not going to fix anything. So let's see how we can move forward. And some of my employees have responded really well to that, and some of them have not, and we're getting there. But like I said, that speaks more to me being kind of a jerk than anything else, I think. Next question.
Hi, my question is about your increased investment in students and student staff in particular. I would like to hear more about your thinking in shifting a lot of your resources to that area. And before I turn it over to you, it's kind of a leading question, and I want to tell you my background thinking. In our library, I work at UMass Amherst, an academic ARL library. For years and now, more attention we're spending on how to diversify, get more people from underrepresented groups in our libraries and on staff. And it's a industry-wide issue, and we're looking at how to address this further back in the pipeline through students, and so student workers in particular. So I'm wondering if that's one aspect of your increased focus on students and student staff, but if not, still, what your priority, you're thinking in setting that priority.
So a good chunk of our thinking was that, as Ashley mentioned, in law schools, we've had trouble attracting students, retaining students. Our student population also shrank, not quite as drastically as Stetson's, but
Boston University and Stetson are very different. Those are facts.
In law school, rankings are everything. And so we really wanted to focus on, what can we be doing to keep our current students happy so that they're not leaving for other schools? And also, just faculty are using us less and less. They need us less for reference questions. And we have this whole other patron group that we wanted to focus on. Hopefully, and part of it is definitely self-centered. If we can get them into the library and pigeonhole them over a nice glass of wine, they will usually tell us what we are missing, what they would like to see in terms of resources, in terms of services, in terms of the problems that they're experiencing that we had no idea were happening. Did I get all of the question? Okay.
Hi, Sarah Kennedy, Cornell University, working on my third position at this point. So nodding my head and shaking in agreement with a lot of your experiences. Great panel. I'm intrigued by this idea of high trust, high functioning teams that have a condensed timeline for addressing issues. And there's a lot of disagreement about how to do this and how to do it well without also perhaps upsetting the old guard that is suspicious of change for the sake of change, been there, seen that. So I was wondering if you had some thoughts on models that have worked particularly well for you for rapid innovation.
In general, I found that, and I may be lucky, but the challenge for me is I work with a lot of really willing people from all generations, from who have been with the library for a variety of time. Certainly at Houston, we have people that are post-continuing appointment, and it could be, if you're in a pre-continuing appointment, post-continuing appointment thing, you know that there can be challenges in motivating that group specifically to change anything. But if you can identify within, and this is in a lot of actually literature around tech startups, if you can identify within your organization people that want to innovate, bring them to your teams, and then start to disseminate and sort of have them be evangelists for the changes, the positive changes that are happening in your library, it's easy to grow that group at that point because they're going to be touching parties that you cannot touch as an individual. So you create a network within your library that's pushing innovation forward, has been how I've found success. And I'm also happy to talk about that offline.
I think we're just about done, but I'll answer just real fast. I found that changing physical space when we want to make changes to other things has been extremely helpful. So having people switch cubicles or even shift a part of the collection to a different location in the library has really sort of shifted focus from the changes we're trying to make on a team to thinking about, okay, well, why are we making this space change and what can you guys do to be those evangelists to make the whole thing better? And so that has worked really well for us. Thank you all for coming. This has been awesome.